Living my bucolic life, we have 3 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and wheel the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello and welcome back. So this is going to be a start of a project that's probably going to take me some time. So just letting you know, I'm starting it now, but it's probably going to take me a few weeks, so I will be publishing this video in the future, okay? And what it is a few videos back, I used this pattern to make a mock-up dress for my daughter based on a photo that she had sent me, okay? So that mock-up I mailed to her. She's in Arizona, I'm in Ohio. Far distance, okay? So when she got it, the bottom part fit, the top did not. So off camera, I made some adjustments to the pattern and sent her just a true mock-up of just the top part, okay? Sent that to her, wasn't quite right, did it again, sent that to her, and now we have a top part that fits her well. So with that, I'm ready to go ahead and get my real fabric cut out. This is going to be the one where I'm using my beautiful pearl gold and everything Linton tweed. And I'm going to be using Bimber rayon for the lining. And I'm going to be incorporating a few more couture type techniques in the construction than just my usual blast through it type of techniques. So that's why it's going to take me a little bit longer. So I think the first thing is I'm going to tip the camera down and show you what changes I made to the bodice pattern so that it would fit her, because she is petite, you know, she's smaller, and so I had to make a petite adjustment, make some other adjustments, so we're good there. Let me show you that, and then I'm going to get started actually cutting it out, which is terrifying to me because I have had this fabric sitting here for probably about a year now, so that's going to be scary, but we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Thank you. So the front is the part that got the brunt of my cutting and taping and everything. The only thing that I did to my back is down here at this lengthen and shorten hairline. I did the same thing on both. I shortened it by 1/2 inch, okay? And I did that over here too, where I made a little 1/4 inch deep tuck and taped that down. And then I ended up cutting the pattern down a size. Yeah, I cut it down 1 size on the top part. The bottom part is staying where it is. And so that's all I did here. But the way that I guided it is down here, if you can see, at the waist level, where it's still at the larger size, where it would match up with the skirt down here. I just kind of tapered it so it's just blending into the smaller size by the time it gets up to the underarm point, okay? So that's it for the back, and the back skirt is exactly the same, so I'm just going to set that over here. For the front, all kinds of things to the front. First of all, I ended up, you know, in addition to this little lengthen and shorten here, shortening of 1/2 inch, cutting it down 1 size, basically up to this point, and then guiding it again out to the larger size at the waistband. It was too gapey up here. So I ended up folding this in So it's basically about 1/2 inch tuck up here. So it's taking it in nearly an inch up at the top, blending it down into nothing down here. Because it was really gapey, it was hanging out and that was no good. Also, I moved the center line in to this point, about 1/4 inch in. So everything shifted in that way. Because of that, I also, this front dart had to make smaller by 3/4 of an inch. So I took in the distance from each one of these dots, brought it in, used the same top, and made that dart. So it's a much more narrow dart. If you can see, those are my new holes down there, okay? So it's a much more narrow dart here, still wider here, going much narrower here. Now when I tucked this, the entire piece here rocked that way. So this dart is slightly larger than it was before. But it worked okay. When she tried it on, it worked okay. So that is that. The other thing is, because I had to take in this amount here, okay? I mean, I had to let out, I would say, this amount here. So I'm basically letting it out 3/4 of an inch to an inch, okay? Because my dart here is so much narrower than it was before. On the front of the skirt, there's 2 darts. I'm just omitting this one. I'm gonna technically move this one more centered. We'll deal with that as I'm making it and I'll show you. But I'm not going to be reducing it by this and this, just by this amount. I know it's confusing. So right now I need to go ahead and get started cutting this out. So first of all, if I was doing true couture, what I would have is a pattern that is trimmed at the stitching line, and instead of just cutting it out, I would be thread tracing that stitching line and then cut out outside of that. I am not going to do that because I want to save this pattern as is, because now that I have one that will fit her, a sheath dress type pattern that will fit her, I can reuse this over and over in slight variations to make other things. So I want to retain it as is. I am going to be very careful and cut out a single layer at a time to make sure that everything is perfectly straight. And also there is a very slight plaid on here. If you can see, there's little areas where there's more gold than others. And I'm going to do my best to get that matched up somewhat, you know, as best you can. So the other thing is, I did cut a small piece and I drew all over it with my heat erasable pen and went over to my ironing board and did a test, and it erases perfectly. So I will be using my heat erasable pen on this project. And I have also gone downstairs and scrubbed my hands because I work on a lot of dirty, greasy machines. And I don't want any of that on here. So I think that every time I'm about to work on this, I'm just going to make it a practice of scrubbing my hands first so none of that has a chance of coming over here. So with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and get started cutting out. So I got my first bodice front cut out, and then I layer that on top of my fabric. And see, I have my gold here, and I just want to make sure that carries over, that everything is lined up. It's lined up down here, lined up over there. And now I can cut it out. The very first thing that I can tell you that I am going to make sure I do is serge around every single piece I cut out, because if you've never worked with this stuff, it's fabulous, but it's basically a very loose woven of beautiful things, of ribbons. This looks like a little woven strip of some kind of a mesh with a zigzag, of gold threads, of linen threads, of things. But because of that, it just, you know, comes apart amazingly easily. And I don't want that. So I am going to be serging around everything, but I can retain different parts of this, different threads and everything, and I'm saving all of my scraps because these make beautiful trims for another project, or maybe even for this one. I haven't decided that yet, but yeah, saving my scraps from this one. And for this piece, which is folded, placed on a fold, I have it folded double, but I can't see the bottom. So what I've done is I've pinned it here, and at the bottom level of each little section that has a gold thread, I've stuck a pin in the bottom row of the gold thread, so that way when I flip it over this way, I can see, here, I can see that those pins line up pretty well with where those threads are. And it took me about 3 different tries before I could actually match it up right. So I'm going to go ahead and get this piece cut out. I'm just doing one at a time, placing it, thoughtfully cutting it out, and then moving on. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces, the 4 pieces, and I'm only cutting out 4. Just the front bodice, the back bodice, and the skirts. And I gotta hold my little dog because it's thundering outside, so, okay. This dress does not have pockets. It does not have a lot of extra embellishment. The whole beauty of this dress is going to be the fabric and the fit and the clean lines. Now, when I cut it out, I did have enough left over that there's a very good chance, if time permits, that I will be making a bolero kind of jacket to go along with this. But that will be another project for another day. So like I said, I have cut out the lining, I've cut out the main fabric, and I have serged around each of my pieces of my main fabric just because it frays so terribly, terribly. And I know that none of these seams are going to be exposed. They will all be inside a complete lining, but it's just for preservation of the fabric for while I am working on it. So that's where I am right now. Like I said, it's a storm coming. There's a little bit of thunder going on. My little dog Katie, let me tip it up so you can see her. This is my little dog Katie, and she gets terrified when it's storming. So I'm just going to take a break because she's trying to climb up on me constantly and, you know, console her gentle soul. She was an abused little puppy and she was a rescue, and so, you know, we give her a lot of sympathy. Anyhow, that's it for today. I'm very happy with what I did. There was a lot of, I wouldn't call it anxiety, but it was the whole, oh my goodness, that moment of excitement when you cut into the fabric that you've been putting off for so long. So I've got it. I'm happy with it. Next time we're going to start putting it together. See you later. Hello and welcome to the next day. I have some scraps here on my table that I'm playing with because I'm trying to get an idea of the best way to use everything to its fullest potential. So here's a little scrap of just the tweed. And what I want you to see is it's very unstable. It's beautiful, but it's very, very unstable. It will, you know, get distorted very easily if it's under stress, all right? And this is a straight dress, which does have that tendency in that design, you know? So what I'm looking at is, this is a piece of the fabric, just plain. This is the lining I'm going to use, which it's slightly darker, but I like that because I think that it helps bring out the definition of the ribbons and everything like that. So all the detail in the tweed, I think, shows up better on a darker, slightly darker background than on just pure white. So like, say if I take a piece here, and here's a bunch of organza, and I just set that on top of the white, it's kind of hard to see the detail as clearly, at least in my opinion, as I can on this piece. Okay, so that's why I'm going with a slightly darker lining. Now, this is Bimberg rayon. It's like a silk. It's very, very lightweight. It does not add a lot of stability either. So I've got my organza out here, and I have a piece of my scrap here pinned It's got a piece of organza sandwiched between my tweed and my lining. So it's like a happy medium where I'm still getting a little bit of definition. It's not as bad if it was just white on white, but I think that having the organza sandwiched in, I still have some freedom of movement, but it helps it stay a lot more stable. It gives going to give my needle something stable to grab onto. And organza is kind of cool. I'm going to be using it in place of interfacing. I was just trying to decide how much I'm going to be using. If you try to bend it with the lengthwise grain here, it's not going to bend all the way. You're not going to get that crease. That's going to be a nice, firm, spongy, not spongy, but bouncy action there, okay? Now, if you try to fold it this way, it's going to fold a lot easier, okay? So this is like, here's the selvage edge, folding it on the cross grain like that. That's easier this way and not so much. So I want to use that to my advantage to help, everything stand as firm as it's going to. So this is my thought. I'm going to be cutting out of my same pattern pieces that I already cut lining and my fashion fabric out of. I'm also going to cut tweed. I'm going to cut organza, including the skirt, just because it's going to add a lot more strength to it. And this organza it's sturdy enough that it'll do that, but it's not so stiff that it's going to make the skirt feel stiff. I just think that that's my best option right now. So let me go ahead and take this isn't silk organza, it's, a synthetic organza, but it'll work for me. It'll work for me, it's nice and durable. I don't have to worry about shrinking or anything like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut my 4 pieces out of this right now. Okay, so with everything cut out, coming up with a strategy here, and I believe that what I am going to do is, at least for right now, set my fashion fabric beautifulness aside here and just work on my layers of organza and lining. And what I am going to do is underline the lining with the organza. And I've decided to do that because I am going to attempt to ease in a lot of the fullness on that fabric through pressing methods that on this fabric need to be taken in with traditional darts. And there's, you don't ease organza, it's just not done, but the organza is going to be a stabilizer to ease up to on the other side. So with that, what I'm going to do is match up 1 layer of organza to 1 layer of lining here very carefully. So what I've decided to do is I have my basting thread, my little needle here, and I am hand basting it, and with kind of like an uneven basting stitch where I take a long one on the top and a short one on the bottom, and I'm sewing it at somewhere between 1/4 inch and 3/8 of an inch. I don't want to have to remove this before I machine stitch it. So I'm thinking that by having it a little lower than the regular sewing seam allowance, I'll be able to pull it out easier. But to do the corners, I want to show you, first of all, always have the right side of your fabric facing up. For me, the right side is the lining because I'm just underlining it with organza here, okay? And try to lay it on a flat table so it's as flat as possible. So if this is where I'm going to be stitching up, I take this row of stitching just beyond that, come down at a diagonal, and then head up that direction. Okay, that way I have a really nice corner. It's going to hold it nice and sturdy down there, and all will be good. Let me see, pull this up here and I'll show you the back. So on the back it looks like this with a little bitty X there, okay? So I'm just going to take my time. I'm going to do this to every single piece. So I've got 2 front, 2 back, 2 front skirt, 2 back skirt, a whole lot of it. I'm just going to take my time, maybe put something on to watch on my computer over there, and just do my very flat, conscientiously pinned and stitched hand basting all the way around every single piece. And I will be back probably next month. Good morning and welcome to the next day. I was actually able to get all of my, where's my pens? Here they are. All of my linings and organza basted together on all of my sections last night, so that's a good thing. I feel pretty good about that. So this morning I had to come up with a strategy on how I'm going to approach this whole piece here, this whole garment. And what I have decided, because I'm going to be doing this type of fabric different than this type of fabric. This kind of fabric, the lining, I'm going to be making traditional darts. This, as much as I am able, and you know, with this side dart on the front, it's going to be a little extreme. We'll have to work that out. I'm going to try to, through easing and heat, I'm going to try to incorporate all the fullness that way. So, a little bit different. This is my plan of attack I've come up with. First, I'm going to work on just the lining bodice and do that with the darts. Then I need to create some stays, and I'll show you that later. And then I will do the bodice fashion fabric pieces. And then I do need to do the skirt, connect the bodices to the skirt. We'll just take it one step at a time. But I'm going to start with my back bodice piece because it looks like the simplest one out of all of this. It does have one dart. I'm going to set the fashion fabric piece aside for just a minute and go ahead and lay this on here and mark my darts. I am using my heat erasable pen. I do know that it will erase pretty much on Bimber Grand. What I've noticed is that on this rayon, at the point that I draw, it's slightly lighter, but if I wash it once, that lightness disappears. This won't be washed in the machine, it will be dry cleaned, but having a slight lightness, I don't think is a big deal. Ooh, actually, I need to mark these on the organza side, the wrong side. Just glad I caught that. So anyway, marking this on the organza side, I'm gonna mark my 3 dots for each dart. I'm gonna go ahead and mark it over here too. Now, because there are 2 layers, it's really important that I get them together. There's the tricky part if you have a layered fabric, and especially if they are very ill-behaved, like both of these are, that they're going to want to separate when you're folding it into a dart. So what I'm going to do is take the extra step at this point and with a needle and thread baste around the edge of the dart, probably between 1/4 and 1/2 inch on the outside of each one of these marks. Not sure if you can see, but I have very wide basting stitches just roughly going around this dart, so that's all I need right now. I'm going to go ahead and do this one too, and then we'll fold and make these darts. Okay, so now that they are basted around, I feel a lot more confident. So I'm going to go ahead with my usual way of forming my darts, just with a pin down each dot in the bottom and pinching it up here. Okay, now my organza is running with lengthwise this way, as you normally would. So what that means is I'm able to fold the darts this way. If I was going to have to make a dart coming this way, which I will be on the front, it's not going to fold as happily, but it will do the job. Okay, that looks pretty uniform to me. I'm going to go ahead and pin up the other side. And then at my sewing machine, I'm going to start at the end, come all the way up, and just run off the top edge of my dart. I'm not going to be back stitching. I'm going to be using pearl today, and I had to put a new number 9 needle in it, and oh, 16. I can never see what size the needle is because I just can't read that tiny print, but what I do, I just thought I'd show you if anyone's like me, because I like to keep them organized by size. If you put your phone over it, here, if you put your phone over it, over the little thick part up here, it's imprinted on there, and you can blow it up huge, and then it becomes really obvious exactly what it is and the maker and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and put this away, and we will say hello to Pearl. Before I really get started with her, I'm going to give her a couple drops of oil and run her for just a minute on some scrap cotton fabric, just to make sure that I've worked all of the oil out of her system. I use a bottle with just a tiny needle on top so you can make sure you get it where you want it to. So I'm starting at the edge. I'm going to do a couple little back stitches and come on up. Oopsie, put it back and forward. Now I'm following it to the tip of my drawn dart. I can see that little dot very clearly. Just gonna head right to it and go off the edge a couple stitches. Just gonna go ahead and pull it out, leaving a tail up here at the top. Okay, so over here, while I'm waiting for my iron to warm up, I'm just gonna go ahead and pull out all of my little basting stitches. I just do one little back stitch at the end to lock it in, so that way it's easy to pop everything out. Okay, so now I am first going to press my dart flat. I am using steam. I hope it doesn't fog up my camera. Let me press that center back again. And you can see that erases all of those marks. So now that I have it pressed flat, I'm going to press it towards the center. Okay, so on the right side, that's what it looks like, and I'm just going to press it one more time over here because I can. I think my needle might have been slightly dirty, the one I was basting with. You can see it left tiny little pricks. I mean, I'm probably the only one in the entire world that'll ever notice that. But before I baste anything, I'm going to clean my needle or get a different one, I think. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. Okay, so now that I'm looking at the right side here, my darts are in and pressed, what I'm going to do is use just some 1/4 inch twill tape. And I'm going to start on this side, go all the way across the very bottom edge to this side and trim it so it is exactly the finished width here. Now at this point I can still see that center crease, so I'm going to put a little mark there, and I'm putting a mark where these dart seams are. Okay, so my fabric does not have a right side or a wrong side. It's the same either way, so I'm just going to pick on this which one I want to use. And the first thing I'm going to do is I need to mark my center back. So I'm just folding it in half here at the top and bottom. And it looks like if I connect these two, my center back seam is running right alongside this row. So I am just going to put a long basting stitch down my center back and I'm just using this row of weaving on my tweed as a guide, and I'm going to be leaving this marking in probably until I'm just about done with this whole project. just because keeping track of the center back is going to be very handy for matching everything up. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, after I've marked my center with that red line, I need to mark where the center of the dart is. I'm just going to stick a little pin, basically, let me see here, measure from one circle that I've punched out to the other is 1.25 inches. So 5/8 of an inch is right in the middle, right here. Okay, that's this line. So I'm going to put a little pin there just for right now. And the same thing on this corner, mark the center of the dart right here. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of math stuff here. In order to ease the fullness of this dart in place, I need to have some extra space on the outside that I'm going to work in. And so if this is 1.25 inches, half of that is 5/8. So what I'm going to do is measure from 5/8 of an inch out. From this dot over is here, and this dot over is here. Okay, so I've got these two positions marked. And that's going to come in handy when I'm putting my little stay on. So, here's my little stay. All right. First of all, I'm going to pin the center line where my little red center line is. Okay, matching those up. Now, from this point, if I am adding 5/8 of an inch to the outside and 5/8 to the inside, from this center point, it's going to be 1.25 inches here and 1.25 inches there. Okay, so that's from my center to one dot is 5/8 to this point is 5/8. Okay, so if I take my little pin and I measure over 1.25 inches, it's right here. That is where I am going to pin this little stay up to, right here. Okay, just going to have the pin come up right there. Then over on this side, again, I'm going to measure 1.25 inches, which is right here. And that's where I'm going to have this half of my stay pinned up to. Okay, now I'm going to be taking this off. That's why I'm just pinning it right now, because when I do it for real, I'm going to baste it. But I just wanted to give you the idea. So this stay that we made, it's holding this big gap. All of this stuff in here is what I'm going to be easing into this gap. And I want to try it on the back first because the front piece has even wider darts. That side dart is even wider. And I kind of want to play with this and see the extent that I can shrink it before it stops. You know, there comes a point where it's not going to be able to shrink anymore. But let me go ahead and unpin this really quick, because before we can baste the stay on, I'm going to need to run some gathering stitches down here. Okay, and so from this pin over, I'm still in the seam allowance, so I'm going to use my heat erasable pen. Okay, and over here, so from the center of my dart over 1.25 inches, center of my dart over 1.25 inches, I have two little marks. I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches, one at probably about 1/8 of an inch, one at, you know, about 3/8 of an inch. I'm still staying inside of the seam allowance in here, just between those two darts, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, so you can see I've got my gathering threads in here. So let me grab this little piece here. Now, on each side of the dart lines, I need to draw a line 5/8 of an inch. I know, so much, so much. So junk, 5/8 of an inch. Okay. And on this side here, 5/8 this way and 5/8 this way. Okay. So I've got this little section with 3 little hash marks on each side of my center. All right. So I'm going to place my center, line it up with the center back here. Okay, I've got that pinned in place. Now this first line that I've drawn, that needs to match up with the line where my gathering threads are placed, and you shouldn't have to stretch it at that point. Okay, so I'm just going to pin that there, and over here too. It looks like I'm shifted just a hair. That's okay. All right, so I'm matching up this line over here to that first line where my gathering threads are starting over here. Okay. Now, I have this stay for a few reasons. One, to help me guide this in, but also to keep all of this. This is a very loosely woven fabric, and it's going to want to stretch out of shape. So having this stay on here, in addition to helping to gather these in, it's going to help just keep all of this stable down here. All right, so coming down, this second line here needs to line up with where my gathering threads end, right here, and that should go all the way to the edge of the fabric. I'm going to do the same, pin it over here also, and I'll do the same thing on the other side over here, matching this mark with the point where my gathering threads end. I could hand stitch this, but honestly I just want to do it on my machine. Right down the center of my twill tape where the little chevron design kind of comes together, I'm going to just do a little row of stitching from the end to this point where my gathering threads start, from the center points in between gatherings and on this side, so I can remove all of these pins. So I've got it all stitched on with the exception of those 2 little bumps. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and take one of them and tie them off, so I only have loose threads on the outside edges, just, you know, to make it easier, because having too many gathering threads just annoys me. Okay, so I just have it gathered together. It's not pinned on or anything, it's just gathered enough that it could fit. Okay, I just have a pin over here with my threads wrapped around it. I'm going to do the same thing over here for this side. And now I need to go over to my ironing board and see what I can do to try to get this nice and flat. So I've got it up on my ham. I just have the tape up against the edge here. And I'm just going to add some nice warm wet steam here. And come back and press it. And what I'm trying to do is just compress all of these loose threads so that they will lay closer together, but without buckling over each other in a gather. We're just trying to make them go from running this way to running that way, if that makes sense. And it looks like it's working very nicely indeed. I love that. That was easy. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin over here to hold it in place. Okay. I don't know if you can see, it just basically took all of these threads that were running straight and molded them together. So once I do the other side, the same way as this, I'm going to come back and just continue running some stitches over this tape to lock that into place. Okay, I think it's set pretty well. I have this just pinned onto my ham, and I'm going to leave it here because I used a lot of steam and heat. I'm going to leave it here until it has time to completely dry, completely cool, so I probably won't even touch it for at least an hour. And then once it's in that condition, then I can carefully lift it up and go to my sewing machine. but I want these threads to get really well adjusted to their new home first. All right, so at this point I have this done. Once it was completely dry and cool, I came back and just stitched the twill tape over that gathered spot, okay? So this is what my back looks like. Keep my marking pen away there. I'm going to call this part good for right now, set it aside, and go get my front bodice pieces. Okay, so my front piece has 2 darts, a smaller one down here at the bottom and a really, really big one here on the side. I know the one on the bottom, it's not going to be any trouble easing it together like we did on the back here. This one, I have no idea how it's going to turn out. We're just going to hope for the best. But before I get started on that part, I'm going to do my lining. So I do have my 2 pieces here. And I'm going to be marking these darts on the wrong side, which is the, where are you marking for me? There it goes. Which is the side with the organza, not the lining. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark these like so, and connect the lines as I do. Okay, like that. So I'll make this in the traditional way. And also down here at the bottom, remember the dart was originally this wide. It's now much narrower. By making it much narrower, the waist increases by just enough that she has a little bit of ease there. So on the lining piece, I'm just going to make these the regular way, just like you saw before, pinning them in half after I have them marked, sewing it from the outside in, just going off the edge there. I realized after I started pinning these that I did not baste around them like I did on the back. And I don't know if you can see, it wants to kind of separate, you know? So just to be safe, you know, it doesn't add a whole lot, maybe an extra 10 minutes altogether in the whole scheme of things. I'm going to go ahead and quickly baste around these darts just like I did last time, about in ½ an inch outside of each of them. So before I start that, I'm just going to pin the centers here so that they stay where I need them to be while I'm basting it. Okay, so I've got my linings done. After I stitched my darts, I pulled out my basting stitches and pressed them, you know, so they are nice and pressed flat now. And there are 2 darts on each of these, so everything we did on the back, we have to do like twice as much here. So the first thing I'm going to do is once again get my twill tape. I'm just going to be using this all over the place today. And I'm going to start by doing the bottom segment. So I'm just measuring a piece that's going to go straight across. Looks like this is the spot here. I'm going to cut 2 of those. Okay, but I'm only going to mark 1 at a time so I keep them straight. I'm just going to do 1 totally and then do the next one. So again, I'm going to pin this end here so that the end piece is matching up with the end piece of my bodice. And actually it looks like I need to trim about 1/8 of an inch off here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin this edge on just to hold it in place. I am going to be modeling this piece with this. Okay, so this has the armhole over here. Let me raise you up a bit. This has an armhole over here, and I'm placing this armhole over here. Now, when I do the other one, I'll do it the same way so that I can end up matching everything together. But just understand, I'm going to end up with 2 different sides of this fabric just when it's time to actually put them together, I'm going to swap them. It'll make sense later, but trust me, I'm going to end up with two correct sides, okay? So anyhow, I have this little piece of tape here with this marked in the center of the dart. Now I'm going to place my pattern here, right here, okay. And the center of the dart on here, because you know I shifted things just a little bit, is right here. Okay, so I made a little line. Okay, so if my dart is 1 inch wide, I'm going to need to add at least 1 more inch for ease, okay, to add in space to do my ease. So if I take the center of this dart and measure out to that line, it's 1/2 inch. I'm going to, if I'm adding an extra inch for ease, I'm going to go another inch. Basically, from this center point here, which is marking the center point of my dart, I'm going to make another line out here, 1 inch far from it, and over here, 1 inch farther from it, okay? Just put this up here for right now. So, getting my little piece, I'm going to start pinning it from this outside edge here. And I'm going to pin it all the way to that first little mark I made. Okay, and I'm doing this just to make sure I have a correct fit. I will be taking it off and putting in gathering stitches in just a moment. Now this over here, I start on that side and I pin up to the mark on this side, which is 1 inch from the center of dart. Okay, and that's going to give me a space like this that I'm going to need to ease in to this space. All right, I have that marked, and I'm going to put a little straight pin here because it's easy for those marks just to kind of disappear. I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches in between those 2 marks. Actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to mark the same thing on this side, okay, the same space, about that wide. I'll use my pattern and mark it up the same over here, and 2 rows of gathering stitches just between those 2 little pins on either side of the bottom. I'm going to deal with the side dart after I get this one done. Okay, so excuse me, I've got my gathering stitches in for both sides, and I got 1 piece of bias tape pinned on over here. I'm going to pin this one on. So basically, once I have all of these marks here, as long as my, not bias tape, twill tape, because you don't want something that does not stretch, and twill tape will not stretch. Once I have these marks here and I have this cut to the size of my lining piece, I just need to pin it on, matching the outside edge first, and putting a little pin right before where that mark is, where my gathering threads start here, and then bringing the other side of my tape over to this side, pin it so that the cut edges match out there, and put a little pin just before my gathering threads start over here. Okay, I'm going to put 1 more in the middle. And now I'm going to go over and stitch my twill tape on from this point out on both sides, leaving all of this part with the gathering threads on it free. Okay, so at this point, my tape is sewed on. I'm going to go ahead and just tie a little knot on one side of my gathering threads so that I can just cinch everything in by just pulling on the other side. Okay, so got that cinched in, clip it about 1 inch away. Okay, And just like the back piece, once I get these little threads gathered, I'm going to go over to my ironing board and my pressing ham, and with a whole lot of warm, moist air, steam, everything, I'm going to press this until these threads are happy with their new position in life, and then just leave it pinned onto my ham. Once this part is completely cold and dry, then I'll take it off and come back and start on the side darts. But we're just going to do one side at a time. So I'm going to do that for both of these bottom darts right now. Okay, so I've got the bottom done on my front pieces, and I feel like I have not done a good job explaining what I'm trying to do here, that I get garbled up with all of the math when I have the camera rolling. So I think I can explain this better now. My steps. First step, make the darts in the lining so you have your finished size. Second step, cut a piece of a stable thing that you can make a stay out of. This is a stay. Twill tape is fabulous. It does not stretch at all. So now I have these pieces that are the size of my finished side. Okay. Then, on the fabric that I'm going to be easing, at the 5/8 inch point, which is where the little dots are, measure the opening size. You can kind of see it on my little grid down here. Between this dot and this dot is about 2.5 inches. 1, 2.5. Okay? So, half of 2.5 is 1 1/4. I think we can agree on that. So then, on my fabric, let me use this one because it's laid the proper way. On my fabric here, I want to know where the exact midpoint of these two are, and it should be, if I put a ruler here, at 1 1/4 inches, because that's half of 2.5. Okay, and I'm going to put a line there right here. That is my midpoint. Okay, hope you can see that. Now, since my dart is 2.5 inches, I need twice that space to ease into. So, twice 2.5. I'm going to start at that center mark and come out here 2.5 inches. Put a mark on this side. Start at this point on the center mark, come out 2.5 inches, put a mark on that side. That whole space here, because this is a huge dart, that whole space is what I'm going to ease into half of that width. Okay, I'm going to do that on the other side too. Then I take my tape, which is the finished length, and I'm attaching it to my, well, no. Next step, forget this for a minute. Next step, run 2 rows of gathering stitches within the seam allowance between these 2 outermost marks. Okay, I'm going to go do that first. Okay, so now I have my gathering threads in between these 2 points. So I get my tape, starting at the cut edge on the bottom. I'm going to pin it on up to this point where my gathering threads start. Okay. And then this top part, I'm going to stretch it all the way up here to the top. Put it at the cut edge. And take it down to the point where this top mark is. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and stitch it on to this point and this point. Okay, and with that, I am ready to pull my gathering threads, and you've seen that before. So that's the steps. I hope that that was a little bit clearer. Now this is going to be a very, very big dart, but the principle is still the same, you know, take it in, give yourself twice the room, and it should work, I guess is what I'm saying. It should work. So I'm just going to clip off, after tying a little knot, clip off one side of my gathering threads, give it a tug, go over to my ironing board, and carefully press and steam it until all the little threads are behaving themselves. And then just leave them there, pinned to my hams. If you don't have a ham, you really should make yourself a ham or buy a ham or something there. Very handy. Okay, I think I need to pull it just a little bit more. But yeah, I think this is very doable. It's going to be tight. Not going to lie, it's going to be tight, but I think I can make it work. This is a very, very open weave. This technique is very difficult with a tightly woven fabric. I've done it with a tightly woven fabric and you end up with puckers. But for an open weave, it's a lot easier to get them to smush together. So let me do that and I will show you how they come out after they have been pressed. Okay, so I've got them done. So this is the wrong side of my lining and this is the right side. You can see I've got my gathers over here and I do think that they are fairly flat. There is a lot going in there. I know it looks a little bit bulky, but once it's actually 3D, I think it's going to be great. So I'm going to call this good for the night, and we can pick up tomorrow, and we're going to be doing more of this, but on the skirt pieces, because if you remember, there are darts on the front and the back skirt pieces, so more of this kind of stuff with the individual pieces before we put it back together. Oh, welcome back to the next day. Ooh. Get myself organized here. This project is actually going a whole lot faster than I thought it was going to when I first cut it out. So I might be able to just finish it out in this week and get it shipped off. So that's a really exciting thing for me. I was thinking that I was going to have to wait and get it to her, and maybe if she came to visit someday I could get her to try it on and photo it. But I would actually feel better just finishing it and getting it to her so she has the opportunity to wear it while it's so blazing hot out there and she has to dress up anyway. So with that, let's just keep on going. I have a skirt piece in front of me. It is my skirt back. We're going to do a very familiar process with the twill tape and the easing and the darts and everything, but I'm going to go ahead and show you anyway. So let me tip the camera down. All right, so first of all, I'm just taking my fashion fabric and setting it aside. I will deal with that later. And as you can see, I have 2 darts at my skirt back. And this is that skirt back that has that really long extra center back part for a kick pleat. And at one point I was thinking that I might do something different with that, but I'm just going to stick with what the pattern has. I don't want to change it at this point because the mock-up fit, why mess with it? So what I do with this piece, I will do with the other. Oh, and I wanted to point out, when I was stitching, just basting the 2 all the way around, I did baste it at the bottom, okay? But before I hem it and everything, I'm going to be pulling this basting out because if you can see, there's a tendency to want to get a bit out of sorts, so at the bottom it's a little bit bubbly, okay? When I pull that basting out at the bottom, before I hem it, everything will even itself out. So, but I'm not worrying about that right now. I'm just focusing on this top dart area. So just like everything, I am marking it on the organza side of my lining organza sandwich here. And I'm just going to put my heat erasable pen mark through the little holes that I punched out. And after that, I'm going to connect them. Hang on a second, this one did not go through. I'm going to connect them with my ruler, playing a little bit of dot to dot. Oh, where did you go? There you are. There you are. Playing a little bit of dot to dot to just mark these up carefully. And then I'm going to make these darts. Okay, so it is that familiar time where I get my twill tape out, and I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 lengths that are the finished length of my skirt back piece, including that slit, because at the point that I'm putting it together right now, the slit is not made, so we're just using it as is. Okay. Now, these, I got 2 different darts here. They are both an inch. They're both taking in an inch of fabric, because if I measure up here from the seam line to the fold line, it's 1/2 inch. Well, we know that's doubled. So this takes in 1 inch of fabric, this takes in 1 inch of fabric. And because of, you know, what I was trying to demonstrate previously, what I know is that I would need to add the same amount, 1 inch, to this amount of space to ease it in, just so that things work well, okay? But it works okay because there's an inch of space between the 2 darts. So if this is the hole right here for the seam line for this dart, 1/2 inch beyond that is right here. I'm just going to bring that up to approximately this space right there. You know, let me stick a pin in there, it'll show up a little better. Okay, and then I need to do the same thing because this is a 1 inch dart. So 1/2 inch beyond this little circle, which is the seam line for this dart over here, if I put my ruler up there, 1/2 inch beyond it is right about here. Okay, I'm gonna stick a pin there. And I need to make these marks on the other side also. And I need to run 2 rows of gathering stitches between these 2 marks, okay? All right, I've got my gathering stitches in. I just pulled them up out of the way. So I'm gonna get one of my twill tapes, match up the outside edge. Looks like my serging went a little off there or something frayed out, you know? But that's okay, this twill tape will keep it from fraying up here. I'm just pinning it on and pinning it up to this point where these gathering stitches are, okay? You just put a little mark here so I know that that's where I need to stop. And do the same thing over here. Start this twill tape over on this cut edge. Pin it in place. Pin it up to the point where these gathering threads start. And you know what, just so that it's easier for me to see it as I'm sewing, I'm just going to put a little mark here with my heat erasable pens. Right there, so it's easier for me to see where to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch the twill tape on this outside part here and here. I'm going to do that on both sides, leaving this part open. Okay, so I've got my skirt gathered. I just pulled the gathering threads. I haven't done any pressing or anything yet. I'm over here on my ham and I'm just kind of putting it so it curves where, no, it's not a perfect, you know, buttock curve, but it's close. So I'm going to pin my tape down, and you can see I'm pinning it beyond where the stitching is here. So it's going to hold itself. All right, now this looks fairly bulky right here, so I'm just going to get started steaming it. I'm going to raise you up, hopefully. That will help the camera not get too bad. Okay, so it's moist and warm. I'm going to come in here. Oh, it needs more steam than that. Okay. Try it again. And where it looks like there might be a fold developing, I'm just kind of moving everything around. And this is going to work out really well. So just like, you know, everything else, once I get this set nicely, I will, because this is a very long stretch, I'll probably put one pin in the middle just to hold it in place, and then let this completely dry on its own. I'd probably give it at least an hour before I come back and take it off of my little pressing ham here, just so everything can get used to its new lifestyle. And so the front pieces, very similar, okay? I am going to skip the process of showing me doing the fronts because it's basically the same thing as the backs. There's the same process all the way around. So we're going to skip fast forward ahead. Good morning and welcome to the next day. I am going to get started putting my dress together. I have all of the individual pieces pre-darted, pre-eased and everything at this point. So a couple changes. First, the original mock-up dress, I used a lap zipper. I'm going to use an invisible zipper. I think that it'll give me a much cleaner side, and I think that that's what I'm going to do on this. So just getting that out. Also, I'm thinking that what I'm going to be doing is constructing the back first, and then the front, I'm going to attach the front bodice pieces to the skirt pieces. So I end up with 3 big pieces, a complete back, a right front, and a left front, individually. So I'll do that for my main fabric and for my lining fabric. So I'll actually have 6 pieces, you know, 3 of lining, 3 of the real fabric. And then while they're 2 separate layers, you know, before I combine them, I'm going to put the zipper in, the side zipper at that point. So my first step is to start working on my back panel. So I'm going to bring that over here, the skirt first, because it has this really interesting way of doing the back pleat. And the bodice piece is cut on a fold, so it's already, you know, 1 unit. But the skirt is in 2 separate pieces. So let me get that over here and we'll start putting it together. Okay, so I'm going to get started working on the lining piece. So on the organza side of it, I'm going to make my marks. Now on the pattern, there's this long stitching line that it probably would have been easier to mark this before I put my darts in, but you know, we live and learn, so I'm going to do it right now. And the reason I say that is because when I put my darts in, it curves this side, it tucks it in. Whereas if I was to mark it when it was flat, it would just be a straight line, but that's okay. Up here at the top, you know, it's only 2 1/4 inches. Down here at the bottom, it's 3 1/4 inches. So what I did is I marked, you know, a point like right around here. I got that mark on. So I am just going to kind of connect the top here to this point, and then from this point all the way down to my mark on the bottom. And hopefully that will end up being somewhat straight. I'm actually spending a little bit of time getting this edge here, well, at least from halfway. I can't control that down there. It's going to do its own thing. But at least from the halfway point, getting this nice and lined up on my grid on my table so that then I can make a straight line here. Okay, so this is going to be the inside line. This one, that's wrong. Okay, so now I have a straight line, but even though I drew it completely straight, you can hopefully see that it's going to look quite curved just because of the shape, because of the darting. So that's good. Let me go ahead and make this line on my other side. All right, so I've got that line marked, and on the bottom of the pattern, there's this little dot. I have that marked just with a little crosshatch here. That's the level that oh my gosh, why is my camera zooming in and out? Hang on 1 second. Okay, I was having trouble with my camera. It kept zooming in and out, and I just did a reset, turned off all the autofocus and everything, so I think we're going to be good. This text stuff sometimes is a little troublesome. But what I have right now is I've got my 2 back pieces here. I have serged the edges, you know, here's my basting stitches, it's still there. I just serged the edges because this stuff frays like crazy. And so, you know, just down the sides. The top and the bottom are still not serged. And I have this line, which is my stitching line here, transferred over onto both of these pieces. And there's a mark down here where these 2 dots are. That's going to be the top of my vent in the back. So I have that marked. Ooh, I only marked it on one. I have it marked. Where are you? Here it is. Okay. I have it marked right here. So that is where I need to stop my stitching. So the first thing I'm going to do is just match up my backs, and I'm going to do a regular 5/8 inch seam down the back, but I need to make sure I leave everything open from the point of this dot down. Okay, so that's my first step, 5/8 of an inch, stitch this nicely, and I'll be right back. What I'm going to be doing is I need to make a row of stitching up this line, but because, you know, multiple very finicky fabrics and everything being used here, I am going to baste this before I stitch it, and you baste it going sideways. Well, let me just get it started and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so let me put my needle there. First thing I need to do is mark where my stitching line is going to start. So I have this little mark there. I'm just going to put a little cross hatch over this stitching line so I can see that. And I've got, you know, my thimble and needle and thread. And what I'm doing is I'm going across, down and up on either side. Okay, I'm going to go up about an inch and do it again. So my needle is going down, oh, probably about 1/8 of an inch on one side of my drawn line there, and it's coming back up about 1/8 of an inch on the other side. So this won't take very long, but what I like about basting it like this is that I can stitch right over this, and because the basting threads are going like this, it's easy to pull them out even though you've stitched over them. Okay, so let me finish this. Once I get it completely basted all the way up and I feel confident that everything is nice and smooth here, I'm going to start at the top and stitch it all the way down to this point. Okay, so before I press my little flap here to one side or the other, what I wanted to show you is in the instructions for this pattern, it looks like it's getting pressed. What is this? Well, it's the right side as you look at it. I think it's left side, but this whole little flap is getting pressed this way. But that is for the outside fabric. And so since this is going to be the lining, which is the opposite way, I'm going to press it this way because they're going to be facing each other. So it's going to be like this on this side over here. Okay, so from the right side of my lining, you know, the right side has the tan color, the wrong side has the organza. From the right side, this is what it looks like. And I just have that little flap pinned over here at this point. I'm not stitching it yet, but I'm going to set this aside and get my linen over here now. Okay, so the first thing I need to do on my front pieces, just like the back, is transfer that stitching line over. So I have my flat side. This is my center back-ish area here. I say ish because center back is technically here, but I have it pretty much lined up along a grid line, and I have my very bottom point here marked at 3 1/4, the top one here at 2 1/4, and I just have a yardstick connecting them so I can get a straight line. And because I can't really draw on here because of the nature of the fabric, it just doesn't accept the ink very well. Even though it does erase, I made sure of that. I am just sticking several pins along this line so that I can get the little round heads here, so that when I move my yardstick here, I can go ahead and connect the dots and get that basted in with a colored thread so I can see it. What is this? Huh. Yeah, this is an old yardstick. That hasn't been in business forever. Okay. Anyhow, let me go ahead now. I hope you can see I have little pins here. I'm going to get needle and thread and baste along that so I have a red thread line showing where that stitching line is. I'm going to do that for both of my back skirt pieces. Right, so I hope you can see I have my little red tracing threads here that's indicating my stitching line, and I'm lining up my fabrics together. When I cut them out, I cut them so that hopefully my plaids in the back are matching. So I'm trying to be careful that I get, you know, gold thread matching with gold thread and everything over here. And if I need to adjust it up or down, you know, 1/8 or 1/4 inch or so on the top and the bottom to make it fit, that's more important to me. So I'm just going to take some time and first match up this outer edge. Once I have this outer part matched up, what I'm going to do is run pins this direction down my stitching line. And when I have it that direction, I can open it up and see how successful I was at matching plaids there. And if I need to make an adjustment, I can at that point. Okay, so I have this outside edge matched pretty well, I believe, and I have a lot of pins coming this way. So I am going to go ahead and stitch this. Remember, I have to stop at that point. I need to measure it here. Okay, I need to stop at the point down here that's indicated on the pattern, which is 5 1/4 inches from the bottom. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a pin facing the other direction at that point, so I stop there. Let me just double check that measurement. No, yes it is, okay. So yeah, 5 1/4, whoops, I'm glad I checked. I had it positioned wrong here. Okay, so I have a pin facing the opposite direction here where that 5 1/4 mark is, okay? So I'm going to be stitching from this point up here at 5/8 of an inch first. I'll be right back. Okay, I want to show you something. As you're aware, this line that I thread marked here is at a slight diagonal. It's narrower up here, wider down here, so that means that the skirt itself is slightly tapered in, okay, which is not a problem, but because I really want my plaid to work out right, what that does is it kind of distorts the plaid. You know, up here I have almost a full square, which is what I wanted, but down here it comes in. And I'm just now making the executive decision that I don't want that. I want it to stay so I have my full plaid all the way down. So I'm going to ignore this stitching line that I put in, and instead I am going to follow the place that it is up here and just follow that part in my plaid all the way down so that I'll have a uniform looking plaid. The lining is already sewed. That's okay. My lining layer is going to be a little bit separate from this layer when I do my final hem. So if anything, having the lining layer slightly smaller might protect this layer from any stress from taking really wide steps or something. So let me go ahead and unpin this where I have it. And I am going to pull out my thread here from about this point down and replace where I need it to be so that I have a nice straight line according to my plaid. Okay, I have run another red line here and I basted through both layers. And so now when I open it up, I think that I like the effect where everything is a lot straighter. Okay, so that's the stitching line that I'm going to follow. Since I already have it basted, I'm just going to come back and stitch right next to those basting stitches so I can pull it out after. I'm going to make sure that I mark that same point at 5 1/4 inches from the bottom. So I can stop right there. Okay, so let me go ahead and make that row of stitching now. Okay, so at this point, I have that seam stitched. I have pressed this little flap over in the same direction that on the pattern it shows, okay? And I need to pin up here at the top, a couple pins just to hold it in place before I flip everything over. Okay, so when I turn it over now, I have pressed it. What you can see is that having this fabric underneath slightly changes the color, you know, because this is kind of transparent and that's not. So what I want to do is just grab a scrap of my lining and everything here, and let me see if I can find one that's not full of threads. So what I would have on the inside is my organza and then a layer of my lining behind that. Okay, so let me move this out of the way. So if I place this underneath next to it, this is what it gets. It ends right, I don't even know if you can see, it's going to end right about here. Okay, so the finished product, I think we're going to see this seam. I don't think that that's the end of the world, but we're going to see that seam allowance underneath there. So, you know, just acknowledging that fact at this point, and we're going to move forward because I don't want to trim it out. I want to leave it in there because I think that if anything, it adds some stability, and that's how the original pattern was. That's how the mock-up I made was. So I'm not going to mess with it. But down here from this point down, which is not very far, I have it open. Okay. So what I need to do now is get my back pieces. Again, I'm going to start with my lining. I'm going to go get my lining skirt and my lining back bodice. We're going to put those together. Okay, so I've got them here. So before I actually stitch this together, I am going to go ahead and serge across the top here, locking this little flap underneath it the way it's supposed to go, and serge across the side here. And I'm actually on the top bodice, I'm going to serge down this side, over and back up. I'm going to leave the armholes alone because those are going to be, you know, encased and stitched very closely there. But this is going to be open pretty much from this point down. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. Serge this like that, this straight across, and I'll be right back. Okay, now that that serging is done, I am just coming back and pinning my bottom. Oh, that's a bad pin. Hang on, I'm going to throw that pin away. It's causing a snag. Okay, I'm going through and pinning my skirt layer to my bodice layer. First I matched up my center point here, and then I matched up my outer point, and now I'm just pinning it straight across. Once I get this pinned, I'm going to stitch this straight across here at 5/8 of an inch. Right, so this is what it looks like now after stitching. I press the seam allowance up towards the bodice. So here's my back lining, okay, with my little vent at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to my other fabric, taking the bodice, pinning it just like I did here, sewing across, and I will probably also be putting that seam allowance up towards the bodice. Okay, so I am over here on my ironing board. I need to press my seam allowance up, And this is very thick right here. First of all, it's a textured fabric, but it's very thick right here where I have, you know, multiple layers going on. So what I wanted to show you is I am just going to take my time and once again doing my best to steam all of this, and I'm probably gonna get my camera all foggy, so that it is as flat as possible once I have it moist and warm. I got my little block of wood, also known as a clapper in this case. My little block of wood serves multiple purposes in my room. Okay, so pushing that down to hold it flat, going to do the same thing, push it, push it, push it. Once I am satisfied and I go over it enough that it's as flat and my gathers are as eased in as possible, I'm just going to leave it here and let it rest for a while. I'm not going to move it off my board for probably about an hour. Okay, so I need to start working on my front piece here now. And so I'm just going to do one at a time. And I have not serged around these yet. What I'm going to do is match up and sew this seam connecting my front bodice to my skirt first, sewing that at 5/8 of an inch. In an effort to reduce bulk where that seam line is going to be, I am going to wait until after I get that and then serge it across, encapsulating both edges of both of these. That way I don't have 2 rows of serging going, and I'm hoping that that makes it a little bit less bulky. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now that I have it stitched together, I did one serging across the top, press that seam allowance up towards the bodice. Now I'm going to serge the long edges. So starting here, I'm going to come all the way down. Just because this is a very long straight edge, I understand that that's going to be inside of a little enclosed area. I still want to serge it right now just because, you know, things are coming off quite rapidly. I don't know if you can even see all the little hairs, but they bother me. So I'm going to serge down this side, and then from this point at the underarm here, all the way down to the bottom edge right down here. Okay, so now I am going to do the same thing with my real fabric, and because these look the same, front and back, I want to make sure that I end up with 2 very different pieces. So I can tell here, one side of my skirt has a curve at the hip, one side is completely straight. I could tell that by looking at the grain. This is the completely straight side. So it needs to match up with this front area. Now what I'm going to be doing is calling the side that has the twill tape on it. I'm going to call that my wrong side, you know, just arbitrarily here. And I'm going to be putting right side to right side. So that means this goes over here, okay? So that the outsides have the twill tape. Once I get this stitched, if it feels like it's entirely too stiff, there's always a chance that I could pull off some of that twill tape, but I don't want to risk it right now. So hang on a second, my dog's eating something unknown. It was just a sunflower seed that dropped from my bird feeder, because everyone needs a bird feeder in their sewing room. All right, so let me go ahead and pin these together. Unfortunately, the plaids are not going to match up exactly because we do have different amounts of easing going here. That's okay, at least they'll be level this way, you know. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and pin both of these together and then sew it across right here at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so back over here, I am pressing the seam allowance just as is first. And then I need to open this up, make sure the seam allowance is going towards the bodice. As you can see, well, maybe you can't. Off camera, I have the other side over there. And once again, I'm just going to smooth it up carefully. Lots of steam and heat and pressure. Steam and heat and pressure. and then come back and press really hard with my clapper. And then I'm going to walk away for a while and let my front pieces rest here until they are completely dry and cool. So I'm going to do it a couple more times here just because I really want to flatten out this seam allowance. Okay, it is time to put our zipper in. Now the pattern called for a 12-inch zipper. I am putting in a 20-inch invisible zipper. Side zippers are notoriously difficult to get on, you know, and a 12-inch zipper, that's just not going to cut it, you know. I think that the longer the zipper, the easier it is to get on. The main thing is you don't want the end of your zipper to end at the widest part, because then if there is a tendency to want to poke straight out, that's going to be the point. So I'm extending it all the way down here. I think that's going to be good. So on my pattern, there's a dot here. I've just put a big flower head pin there. That is where the top of my zipper is going to go. So what I need to do is get my corresponding side. This is going to go into the left side of my dress as I'm wearing it, or as she's wearing it, I should say. So I need to get the corresponding side that'll go on top of this. So I grabbed my piece. The first thing I'm doing is just holding up to where this seam matches up with the back seam, just to make sure everything is matching up here. And it is. So that's good. What I need to do is stitch this little seam from this point where the top of my zipper is going to go up to the very top here. So it's only maybe about 3 inches, but I need to get that in first. So since this is an invisible zipper, the first step I do is unzip it all the way, and I want to go to my ironing board and kind of unroll it and press it with the coils unrolled so that they'll stay more flat while I'm going to go sew it on. Now I have it pressed, but what I'm concerned about is on this fabric right here, there's a lot of layers going on there, and I'm concerned that could be quite bulky when it's turned in finally. So what I'm going to do is grade this, the piece that's connected to the front, just for like maybe the first 1.5 inches or so. I'm going to come in here and trim off that twill tape layer. Okay, so I have that gone. Now if I have both seam allowances towards the top and turned in, it's not a huge help, but it is a little bit better. So, you know what, I'm going to cut it actually slightly further back, and I'm going to do the bottom too, because I will have the zipper stitching to reinforce this. I think that that's going to be fine. So I'm going to take off the twill tape of this side also. Okay. All right, so now it looks like this on the inside. So then when I fold it in, oh, that's much better. Okay, I feel better about that. So let me go ahead and trim this side the same way, just basically cutting the twill tape off for about 1.5 inches in. Okay, so for an invisible zipper, the whole idea is that it will disappear when you sew it. So the side of the zipper that is the right side, you know, the side that the little pull tab is on, that's where I'm going to be attaching it with my basting tape, my water-soluble double-sided basting tape. So before I get started with all of this, I'm just going to run a couple rows of it down, again, on the side that has the little pull tab. And it has a paper backing. I just start it up here, right about where the little stopper is. I'm going to run it all the way down and end right here, right on top of where the zipper ends at the bottom. I'm going to do that on both sides, just leaving the paper backing on at this point. I ran out. I had to open up a new pack. This is the brand I use. There's different brands. That's just the one that I usually buy it off of the 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 website, but you know, available everywhere where you shop. Okay, so on the invisible zipper, where the coils start is basically where the seam line is going to continue. And if I'm using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, so I want to make sure the distance from this side of my coil lines to the edge of my fabric is 5/8. And I can see here that the tape on that side is maybe 3/8 of an inch, okay? That means I need to make sure that I place my tape about 1/4 inch in order to continue with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I have my fabric here that is sewn together at this little spot, and I'm just going to pick a side to start with. We've got a lot of things going on here. Hang on one sec. I have pins stuck in places that was stabbing me. Okay, so let's say I'm going to start on this side here. I'm just going to flip the back up and over and out of my way right there. Okay, let me raise you up. So right here is where I started sewing this together, okay? I'm just folding the back side straight up so it's kind of out of my way. This is where that little seam starts. So what I'm going to want to do is place my invisible zipper downward. So the little tab is facing down. My tapes are facing down. I still have the paper on. I'll pull that in just a minute. But what I'm going to do is place it so that the little stopper right here, lift up the seam allowance for a second, I'm going to place it just barely above where this is sewn, okay? So it'll be kind of buried in there. And then as I place it down, you see I have a little bit of serging showing. I'm going to eyeball it to be about 1/4 inch or so, okay? So as I pull my tape off so that it's very sticky, you know, starting it up here, I'm just going to place it all the way down along the edge like this, so I have about 1/4 inch sticking out. Okay, so here is the very top. Okay, so you can see that's where the stopper is. It's just above the opening. And I'm just making sure that seam allowance is up. Let me move you up here. I'm just placing it all the way down as I go, about a little more than this amount of my serge, okay? And I use only one needle on my serger. I use the one that's going to give you the narrower width of serging, so if that is any gauge, maybe it will be helpful. Okay, so now I have it all the way to the bottom here pressed. So I need to go switch out my foot on my machine onto my invisible zipper foot so that I can sew this. And you're going to want to sew it so that the needle is going pretty close to where this row of coils is, but you don't want to get into the coils. If you do, you won't be able to zip up your zipper, so make sure that you stay outside of the coils, but pretty darn close to it. Okay, so over here with Pearl, I've got my invisible zipper foot on. Hope you can see that. It's got 2 big grooves in it, and I just pick the groove that is going to work with the side of the zipper I'm working on. So let me open this up here. If you can see this first groove right here, let me point to it with my pin right in here, this groove, I'm putting that over the teeth of my zipper and setting it down just about where that little stopper is. So let me do a couple stitches. Okay, now since it is taped, I'm just going to come straight down, but when I get to this seam, I want to make sure that these seam allowances are pressed up. Just make sure, slide a pin under there so everything is going the right direction. Okay. And I go until I get to right about this point, because at this point the coils are going to start to want to curl back in, because this is my little tab here, and I can only go so far because I'm going to run into the tab even if I don't stop. So that's what I'm going to end up at. Let me just back up a few to lock it in. It's okay that I'm not getting all the way to the end. That doesn't bother things at all. So let's go back to the table and get the second side lined up. Okay, so it's sewn on now, and I'm facing a dilemma because I really don't want to zip this back up right now because it's going to recurve those coils. But what I want to do is be able to indicate exactly where the zipper crosses at least this point right here, this seam line. That's important to me. So what I'm going to do is come up here at the top and line up where those two stoppers are equal. Okay, put my thumbnail right there, kind of pull it tight at the bottom so the zipper is pretty well matched up there. And then with my pen, I'm going to come over and draw a line where this seam is, okay? At the same time, if I can hold it, I'm going to draw a little line at the bottom gold thread of each one of these plaids. So there's a little one here and a little one there. Okay. Hopefully that will help me to match up my plaid on the other side of my zipper. So let me flip this over so I can be looking at the other side now. So I'm just putting my front piece on that I already sewed onto, kind of on top of my back piece, just because that's going to be convenient. And I need to go ahead and pull my paper backing off of the tape on this side. Okay, that was tricky pulling that tape off. Sometimes it's tougher than others, but we're okay. All right, so with down here, let me see if you can see, I have my zipper face down. My little toggle is down. I can see my marks, okay? I'm going to line up first the mark that goes on this seam line and place it there, still placing it in, you know, almost a 1/4 inch. There you go. So hopefully you can see that mark is lined up with this seam line. And now I'm going to do my best to see about matching up the bottom gold thread of all of this plaid. If I can't do it, I can't, but I really want to try. So I need to match up where the little stopper is at the top here first. And this fabric, I have my stay twill tape on the front. The back one, I could tell it was wanting to get out of sorts. So we're just kind of easing it in as I go here. Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be able to match the plaids exactly going down the side, but that's okay. That's okay. Just going to go all the way down. I have more curviness on the back than on the front here. So, all right, and I should be ending up right here. Okay, well, let me see what I can do to get this taped up so that my plaids are matching as well as possible. Okay, so now that I have the tape put on this side, I'm going to take this back to my sewing machine and with my invisible zipper foot, sew this side of the tape on, just the same as I did over here. Okay, so I got the other side on. I went ahead and zipped it up, so hopefully you can see that is matching going across there. And then when I zipped it up, I went to my ironing board and just pressed this so it's going to lay fairly flat. What I need to do at this point is sew below the zipper. Okay, so I have my little tail of zipper sticking out. That's okay. That's all right. What I'm going to do is come down here, lift that little tail up as much as possible. I'm going to match the bottom edges here, pin them together, and sew it from, if I can reach in here with a little narrow foot or something, starting right about here where my other stitching ended. You know, sometimes I can't get right there. I may start about, you know, 1/8 of an inch or so below it. That's okay. And just sew straight across here at 5/8 of an inch and then press this seam allowance open. Okay, so now I have this side. This will be the left side of the dress finished from up here all the way down. I think it looks lovely. So now the easy part is I just need to sew the right side on, which is just going to be a straight seam all the way up. So let me get this matched up and pinned in place, and again I will sew it at 5/8 of an inch. I want to make sure I have this little area right here matched, and you know what? I had to think about it for a moment there. I am going to clip out probably about 1 inch worth of the twill tape reinforcement there, and on this side just to reduce bulk. Okay, now I will match up this seam line here first. Before anything, get this pinned, go up, pin it up here, fill in the blanks, and then work my way down. And again, 5/8 of an inch, and then pressing it open. Okay, so now that I have that done and the seam allowance is pressed open, I'm just taking a couple minutes and whip stitching the seam allowance here that I just sewed to the waist seam allowance where I trimmed off some of that twill tape, just to keep everything really nice and neat. This one I already did, as you can see, so I'm going to do this on both sides here and over next to the zipper. Okay, so now that I have the real fabric done, I did not sew together the shoulders on that yet. I don't want to do that yet. But I need to get my lining piece done here. So what I'm going to do is the side of my lining that corresponds to the side that had the zipper on it, I'm just going to leave it completely open at that point. So I'm going to sew up my side seam, you know, obviously. Match it up to the front piece. Whoops, that's the wrong one, I believe. Hang on a second. Oy. Okay, so I'm going to be matching up this side seam, you know, to the front piece that it corresponds to here. But what I need to do is only sew from this point up and from this point down, leaving all of this open. Once I get that part sewn, I'm going to press open the seam allowances down here, but also press open this part at about 5/8 of an inch, even though it's not going to be sewn together, just turn down at 5/8 of an inch all the way through this opening. Okay, so the other side, the side that's going to correspond to the right side on the finished garment, is much easier. All I have to do is sew this complete side seam at 5/8 of an inch and then press the seam allowance open. Okay, so now I need to sandwich these things together. Here's a blank page. So basically I have two big pieces that look like this. Let's see. Okay, where this is the back and those are the two fronts. And what I'm going to do is layer them right sides together and sew up here, around and up, and then come down here like this, like this, like this, and like this. I am leaving the very tops of all of the little shoulder seams open, and I'm leaving this entire area at the bottom open. So I know it's kind of hard to show you that right now, so I thought that the diagram might help. So I'm just getting my lining piece here. This is where the zipper will match up to. I'm going to put it face up, get my Linton tweed, put it face down, and start pinning all of the outside edges together. Okay, so I've got all of that stitching done. So let me let you know in my plan here. I am going to be understitching the long front edge, okay? And I'm going to do my best to do some understitching on the curved armholes here. So what I have to do first is do some clipping. I can probably see it better on the lining side because everything blends over here. So I'm just going to trim out the bulk of these corners. I don't want to get too close to that stitching line. I'm leaving myself just under a 1/4 inch away because this stuff frays so badly. Now in the corner here for that front area, I'm going to clip just about to about 1/8 of an inch away from there. Okay, again, because everything frays terribly badly. Up at the top, these I'm eventually going to be opening up and stitching it at 5/8 of an inch. So I just kind of, and some sides I ran up further than others, but I didn't do any back stitching up here. I just went straight up. So that is prepared. Now for the armholes, again, let me flip it this way so it's easier to see. Where this curve is, in order to be able to turn it so it's laying nice and smooth, I need to make some clips in that curve. And again, I am clipping up to probably a fat 1/8 of an inch away, ooh, except for that one there. Just because if I clip all the way up to it, just because it's such a loosely woven fabric, I'm concerned about fraying. Now, when I understitch this, that is going to give one more layer of stitching there, so hopefully any weakness I cause from these will be made up for by the understitching layer. So let me go ahead and finish doing what I've done here to the other side, and in the back, I'll just make a little bit of clipping in the curves right there. Okay, I'll be right back. So to understitch this, I'm going to want my seam allowance to go underneath my lining layer. Okay, and so like putting this under the machine, under the presser foot, I'm going to be making a row of stitching right here, you know, somewhere between the edge and 1/8 of an inch of it, you know, just coming right down here on top of the lining and through both layers. So I'm going to do that first all the way up the front. It gets kind of tricky fitting parts under that have corners and things underneath the presser foot. So I just go as close as I can, and usually that leaves me like, let's see here, up here where this corner is going to be. I'm not going to be able to get all the way to the corner. I'll probably get about this far, which is a couple inches away. So I get as far as I can, put a back stitch in to hold it, and then start up again in the next position that I can get my presser foot in here, and then just keep going. All right? All right, so I've got it stitched and turned pretty much. I need to, you know, work on corners and everything. But what I need to do now is just carefully take my time and press the edge. Actually, it might be easier, again, looking at the lining side. I want to press it so that I can just see a very, very faint outline of the tweed there. I don't want to see my lining when I press it, and the understitching will help it want to naturally fall that way. Okay, so basically it's going to look like this at my edge, and I'm just going to take my time and slowly press all the way around. Once I get this done, I think I'm going to go ahead and drape it over a dress form. I don't have one that is my daughter's size. If I put it on mine, it'll be too small. If I put it on a small one, it'll be too big. But we'll do something just so we can kind of get a look at how it's shaping up at this point. Okay, so first of all, ignore how ugly this dress form is. I'm in the middle of playing musical dress forms, and this one is just, you know, raw padding, but it's the closest one I have to my daughter's size right now. And so at this point, I just kind of have it pinned on here, but what I wanted to see is how it's holding its shape, because the Linton tweed that I have is very, very malleable, shall we say. It wanted to do all kinds of things with itself. But I can see that the way that I reinforced those seams where all my gathering is, and you really can't see the gathering. I think that ease worked really well. I think that it's going to do well. I just have it, basically pinned together here, but it's a good start. It's a really good start. I was a little bit stressed cutting into this at first, but I'm getting used to working with it. And like I said, I do have a little bit extra, so I might make a little jacket to go with it. Another project, another day, but that's always a possibility. So I'm going to take a break. I've about expended myself on this. I'm going to go downstairs, have some watermelon and iced tea or something, and then I will probably be up here later on this evening to take it to the next step. Alrighty, so we're on the final stretch here. I can feel it in my bones. I need to get the shoulders sewn together. So what I'm doing is just pulling the layer of lining back so I can get the Linton tweed all matched up here at the top. You pin it carefully, and you know what? I am just going to sew this by hand. I'm just going to back stitch it by hand straight across there because I think that I'll be able to get it straighter doing it that way than trying to get all of this funkiness underneath and going straight across and not catching anything. It's only a couple inches. So what you see here, I will do on the other side, just straight across here first. So I've got it stitched over and I still have my thread attached because I'm not done with it. I'm going to iron this after I have everything done. I think it'll be easier just to do that all at one time here. So at this point, let's see, this is my front. I'm going to push my front, first of all, pressing open my Linton tweed, putting the front lining into the pocket of the back, and see if I can do this flat here. I'm going to fold under and tuck under that little back part so that the lining looks like this. Okay, and I'm just going to very carefully, I still have my needle over here. Well, first of all, I'll pin it so that it stays where I want it here, but so you can see, I'm going to tuck in all of this stuff, whip stitch it closed, and stitch straight across here. Tuck everything in on the side. Once I have all of that done, then I'm going to iron it, put my clapper on it, and make it nice and flat. Right, so I've got the straps sewn together and finished off on the insides here. I think that that's plenty strong. And now I am working on the zipper area. I've got one side whip stitched down. I've got this second side pinned. And I'm going to whip stitch this one closed here. And I just remembered I still need to cut out a belt and make that up too. Hem the bottom, close up the front, put our buttons on it. And so yeah, several steps still to go, but what I'm working on right now is whip stitching the lining to the side of the zipper tape, making sure I still have plenty of room between the coils and where I whip stitch the lining down that the zipper can go up and down really freely. Okay, I'm looking at my, I haven't even showed this video. This is the inspiration photo I was going for, okay? And I was looking at that, and I have my front panels overlapped by the appropriate amount and matched up there. And I just put my buttons on to see what they would look like. This is them. They are cream in the middle with a gold rim. They're about an inch around. I think that those match the photo pretty well. What I think I'm going to do is first, I'm going to try to somewhat invisibly stitch down with just a needle and thread this whole front area so that it stays where I want it to. It's pretty easy to hide threads in this, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. But this way I can be careful and match up. If you can see, I've kind of got the gold threads of each block matching up all the way down. And that way, one, it'll hold closed, but also I can make sure that my matching stays true. So that's my first step, more needle and thread. I will be back when I'm done. Oh, and at the bottom, I'm going to put a 2-inch hem on this and move you down here. At this point, I have it pinned open at about 8 inches here. So if I give myself a 2-inch hem, that's going to give me, oh, you can't even see that. Sorry about that. My hem is here, once I fold the 2-inch hem up, it's going to give me that much of a little opening in the front, and I think that that's going to be fine. So again, needle and thread. I'm going to stitch it up starting about here where this pin is, just invisibly up the very front. Okay, so I have it stitched. I kind of ran a little back stitch along here where I just caught just a couple threads each time I came around, and I think that's going to hold it secure. Now I need to get my button placement up here above the waistline. I need to fit 4 buttons. So what I'm going to do is just use my little buttonhole measuring gauge. And this looks pretty good, so I'm going to put pins at each little prong here. And then I'll just continue with the same placement down here until I get to that point where it's open. So based on the placement here, I'm going to be sewing 10 buttons down the front. And when I go to sew it, I'm going to be going through all the layers again, so that's just going to be one more reinforcement to keep this front very secure. And so once I get all the buttons on, I'm just going to play giving it a little tug to make sure that everything still feels good, because I don't have any machine stitching technically holding it closed. But I'm feeling pretty good between my back stitch and, you know, a button every 3 inches or so. I think that that's going to hold it fairly well. So give me a few more minutes and I'm going to sew all of these on. Okay, I'm actually feeling really good about this. I went ahead and tacked on the little Linton tag that came with the fabric, because why not? I think that it looks really pretty. What I still need to do is figure out how I'm going to work this hem. I've got this vent to deal with here, and honestly it is 8:15 p.m. I've been at this quite a bit today, and I'm just tired. And I want to look at this with fresh eyes in the morning. So I think I'm just going to walk away for right now. Think about it overnight, get some good inspiring dreams going on there, and I will see you in the morning. Good morning and welcome to what I think is going to be the last day working on this dress. All total, it's been a long time coming. I mean, it started with a whole different project just to get a feel of the sizing. Then it was the mock-up, then it was this epic. And like I told you, I went to bed, slept on it, trying to get inspiration on how to deal with this pleat back here. And what I've come up with is I'm going to omit it. And let me tell you why. The fabric is thin enough that the more I look at it, the more I don't like that wide, lighter colored band going right down the rear. And it's not right down the rear, it's offset, you know, because it's folded over. And it's just asymmetrical enough on a very symmetrical pattern that it bothers me. Also, I don't think it's necessary. I started out by including it because the inspiration photos had a small kick pleat in the back. But since in the front I have that opening underneath the buttons that's going to give the same amount of extra room, you know, for taking big steps and stuff, I don't think it's actually necessary. So I'm going to omit that this morning. And then once I get rid of that, I think that hemming up is just going to be very straightforward. So let me turn the camera down and I'll show you how I'm going to do this. So I've got it kind of inside out-ish here. This is you can see where this row of stitching is here. That's the one. I'm going to continue it right in here. It's open at the bottom. I'm just going to continue in this fold, this line of stitching from where it ended right up here all the way to the bottom first. Let me go ahead and do that. So now that it is stitched, I'm just going to come in here and trim off the extra, leaving approximately a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way to the top. Actually, before I get up to the top, I need to open up this little flap. So I'm going to pick out the stitches just in this little section right here so I can pull this up. Okay, so I picked this open. Now, before things get out of sorts, I'm going to pin it back together quickly over here so that it doesn't go anywhere. And as soon as I get done trimming this all the way up at 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to run over to my machine and re-stitch this part. Okay, so while I was over there, once I re-sewed my little top seam here, I just continued my serging all the way down. And I did serge both of these together because they are both going to lay to one side. I know, not totally correct, but I had already pressed and clapped and everything, this seam allowance, to get it to lay flat that direction. And honestly, it was going to be very tight getting this part in here up under my serger to do two separate ones. So it seemed like the best option to me without stretching, distorting, or anything up here in this very delicate fabric. So now my back looks like a very standard back, and I feel better about that. It was just, this was bothering me all night. So now I'm going to hem it. So what I'm going to do is not worry about changing the lining. It's going to be on the inside. No one's going to care about this. And it's going to be hanging separately from the outside. So I think we're going to be okay. But what I need to do is actually pick the lining stitching. I'm going to pick it up probably about 3 inches from the bottom here on each side, first of all. Okay, so now I have it open at that front area, about 3 inches. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut off and serge this edge 2 inches up. I think that that will be what I need. So just to make sure I actually do it in a straight-ish line, I'm going to go ahead and draw my line here. And to make sure that my layers stay together as they should, you know, I'm going to pin them because you can see it wants to go everywhere. So let me go ahead and do that. Next time you see it, this is going to be serged off at 2 inches. Okay, so this is shorter now. So before I actually hem this fabric, I'm going to, oh, maybe I should have opened this up a little bit more. Scissors here. I'm going to go ahead and turn up the lining 1 inch. So let's see here. If I should have picked open the understitching here, but I think I can make this work. So I'm going to turn up my lining 1 inch and do that all the way across here, making sure I'm keeping consistent. Once I get it pinned up, I am going to lightly press it and then just run a machine stitch, edge stitch up here at the top at a 1 inch hem. I'm going to do that for the entire lining first. Okay, so this is what the hem for the lining looks like. You know, I think it's fine. It is the lining. Now for the fabric itself, I'm going to use some lace, some stretch hem binding lace. And so what I'm going to do, you can't see that. Let me move this up here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take my little hem binding stretch lace here and place it so the edge of the fabric is about halfway up. Put my lace on top of it, and right along here, this edge, I'm just going to stitch it on by machine, like so, all the way around my bottom of my hem. Okay, so now that that is done, I need to hem this up. And I think originally I planned for a 2-inch hem, so I'm going to measure it from the edge of my tape, because I know that that is perfectly even all the way around. And I can fold it up at my 2 inches and fold it in. Ooh, that does not look good, does it? No, no, no. Let's try that again. So I can fold it, this little edge, folded edge in first, and then at the 2-inch point, which is right here where that gold is, I'm going to fold that up, and I am going to, that's a short pin, stitch it by hand all the way around. Come on. Okay, so that's going to be my hem of my main fabric. My lining is going to sit on top of it like this. Once I get the main fabric all stitched down and pressed, I'm going to come back over here, and if I need to put a few stitches like right here to hold the lining over so it doesn't want to pooch out, I will do that. But for the next however long it takes, I'm just going to by hand catching the thread, just, you know, a thread or so in my fabric to the very edge of my hem lace, my stretch lace. I couldn't remember the words for a minute. This actually goes really fast, plus it's a straight skirt, so you know that's easy. But what I do is just basically make a little running stitch in that little groove of the lace. If you can see, so I can get several little running stitches in at a time, and then on the outside, you know, it's invisible. And I like the way when you use the stretch lace, it helps reduce the chances of getting a ridge showing on this side, you know. I mean, it's all obviously doubled down there so that the opacity or opacity of it's going to be less up here than down there, but what I'm trying to avoid is a hard foldy kind of looking ridge right there. So anyhow, let me finish going across here. Okay, so looking at it, I think it's going to be fine. I'm not going to put extra stitching in there. I think that it's good the way it is. I did press this actually before I stitched it, so I think it's good. The only thing I have left to do is make the tie belt, and I'm going to do that, but huge sale at Joann's today, so I am going to run into town. You know, Joann's is an hour and a half from me, so it's always a big event. And then when I get back tonight, I'll make up that tie belt. All right, so the last thing I need to do is make a belt, and I just took my little my measuring tie, tied it around myself like a belt, and I think it's hanging down about the right amount. And these are 60 inches long, and happily this fabric is 60 inches wide. I have serged to this edge that I cut off, so I'm just going to cut another strip of this. I want my finished tie to be about 2 inches, and if I have a seam allowance on each side, I need to cut a strip that is about 5 inches wide. So I'm going to cut it about right here, if you can see that. Right about here, just a strip all the way down, and I am going to serge it just because, you know, fraying issues. Okay, so now that I have my strip, both sides are serged because, you know, raveling. I was toying with the idea of leaving the little fringes exposed because I really like that, but since I'm trying to match a, you know, inspiration garment for my daughter, I am not going to leave them exposed. So I'm just going to fold this in half, match up the sides, and with probably around a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to go up the sides and over. What I want to do is leave an opening near the middle. So I'm just going to stick a pin right in the very middle so I don't lose track of where that is. And I'll probably leave an opening about, what is that, about 6 inches wide at that point. So at here, I'm going to stitch from this point over, and then from this point over, and then down, of course. And that way I only have to worry about turning 1/2 of it at a time. Okay, so I've got that sewed, so now I'm just going to use my little lobster claw kind of turner. See, one side is rounded, the other one is pointy. Putting the rounded side through all the way to the end. Come on. Okay, so I get it to the end. I can pinch it closed and just start pulling it over to the opposite side. Getting it started is always the slowest part. Okay. I want to do this without, you know, having that little pokey part going through the fabric because it is a very loose weave. So then, when I can see the little point coming through, I'll open it up. Oh no, went through, okay. And try to grab that little point. This is such a loose weave. And very carefully, because I could barely grab onto that little tip there. All right, now I got a bigger grab. Okay, so then I can just turn it up. Now the corners here, I'm gonna just kind of turn out the best I can. Once I get the other side opened up, I'm gonna go over to my ironing board and the best I can lay it flat and press it just nice and flat like that. Okay, so it's pressed now, but this is still open. Here, what I'm going to do is just run an edge stitch, you know, probably about 1/8 of an inch in on each side all the way around. It's going to make sure it stays in a nice rectangular shape, and it'll close this little bit up here.